Good morning, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. And we're live today, so please drop your comments and your questions in the comments, and we'll get to a few of those if we can. I'm joined, of course, by Big Blue Views Tony Delgenio. Tony, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ed. Thank you.
And this you never know what's going to happen going forward. But you look at all of these draft grades and you look at what the Giants did, and a lot of praise for what the Giants did this weekend. And on paper, this was an outstanding weekend for the Giants and for Joe Schoen.
Yeah, I think it has the makings of the best draft since Shane became the general manager, and well, frankly, the best draft in many years, even before that. As you say, we have to wait until the games get played to find out whether any of these prospects or how many of these prospects actually live up to their billing. But I think I don't want to say for the first time because I was actually pretty optimistic about the 2023 class, which so far has turned out not to be very good. So you always have to take everything with a grain of salt at this point. But just in terms of who they got and what the community thought of those players as prospects for the NFL, I thought it was a great draft.
You mentioned the community, and I'm going to toss this out just because I thought about it on Sunday morning when I was doing the basically the instant NFL draft grades, and I listed how the Big Blue View community voted in our polls regarding all of the different picks. And what I'm going to say to all the folks who read Big Blue View on a regular basis is, if and when any of these picks fail, I'm just going, because inevitably one or two of them will. I'm just going to remind all of you to go back and look at those polls because you loved these picks. There's not a single pick that had poor grades, even that had any real dislike. There were a handful of D's and F's for a couple of these picks, but most of these picks were solid A's and B's across the board, according to our community. So I'm just going to remind you guys, when one of those picks fails, go back and think about how you felt about it when it was made. And
Yeah,
that's just my soapbox for today.
yeah, that's right. And of course, it's not just the fans. I think it's the professional NFL community as well, and that includes both the working press and even other general managers. I thought one of the more interesting quotes I saw from Joe Schoen at his presser on Saturday, I guess that the presser that he and Brian Dable did jointly, was they were talking about the fourth and fifth round and Scattaboo and Marcus Bowe. And I guess they had both of them on their board and they were going back and forth about which one they should pick with their fourth round pick. And they went with Scattaboo, and they hoped that Bowe might last until the fifth round. But I don't know if they were very hopeful that he would, but he did, and then they got him at the fifth round. And Shane said that what happens during the draft is sometimes he'll get texts from other coaches that he knows about certain picks and things like that after they happen. And he said the presser that he got a lot of texts from people after he got Bowe in the fifth round, saying, "Oh, that was the guy we really wanted, and we hoped he'd still be there, and so on and so forth." And so when you have other GMs and personnel people texting you in the middle of the draft to tell you that, "Oh, you made a pick that I really wanted," that tells you that regardless of how Marcus Bowe actually works out, okay, as a player in the NFL, that's kind of what he was thought about by the NFL, the professional NFL community involved in these drafts. And that's really all you can ask for at this point: is, are you drafting players that most NFL people see as worth drafting at the point that you take them.
Absolutely. And players that fit what you want as well. I wrote, in my column on Sunday, that Joe deserves his flowers for this draft. Whether the move up for Jackson Dart works out or not, we'll have to find out. But the Giants identified the quarterback that they wanted. Yes, they made a trade-up offer for Cam Ward, which was sitting where they were. It was an obvious thing to try to do. They were rebuffed. They clearly saw Jackson Dart as QB2. Brian Daboll clearly sees him as a guy he can work with and develop. So regardless of what else happened, they identified the guy they wanted and they aggressively made sure they went up and got him. Joe, as you talked about, he read the room correctly in getting Dart. He also read the room correctly in terms of, getting Scatterbo and getting Marcus Bowe. So, credit to him that he saw the running back, the run on running backs in the fourth round beginning to start, because there were about 5 running backs that came off the board in round 4 right after Scatterbo did, and hardly any offensive linemen. So he read the room correctly and ended up with guys that he wanted. And I gave him his flowers for the way that he conducted this draft. They identified characteristics that they wanted. And I just wanted to point out that I saw, in the queue this morning, I saw the post that you dropped in there that'll run later today, headlined "The Evolution of Joe Schoen." And I'm just curious. I want you to talk about that a little bit. What you see in Joe Schoen now in his 4th year as Giants GM.
Okay, sure, happy to. Before I do that, let me just comment on Craig Little's comment that I see in the window here about 215-pound running backs who run as physical as Scatterbo usually don't last that long in the NFL. I think the issue is too strong a word, but why he didn't go higher, aside from the fact that the running back position is still somewhat devalued in the NFL, although that's beginning to change, is that Scatterbo doesn't have all that much speed. But if you watch Scatterbo's tape, you don't need a whole lot of speed when you just bowl over defenders trying to tackle you like a bowling ball going through pins, and that's what Scatterbo reminds me of. He looks like a bowling ball who's just hit the pins and they're flying away as they try to take him down. So that's how he's effective. He doesn't really need that speed to be an effective back, and he's I don't want to say he's unusual in that regard. You see some signs of Brandon Jacobs, even though he's a lot smaller than Brandon Jacobs was. But I think that's the effectiveness of him. And if he was faster, maybe he would have gone earlier. But I'm glad he was still there at number 105. And all the better for the Giants. Anyway, that to the question that you led me into. It seems to me that at least based on the evidence, Joe Schoen has gotten progressively better at drafting since he first arrived as GM. And one thing you have to realize about any GM in the NFL is that this isn't always true, but the vast majority of them are hired in January after the previous regime has failed and after the season ends. And so you come in January to a new team, and you've got 3 months, 3.5 months, depending on exactly when you're hired, until your first NFL draft. And you walk in and you've got all of the previous regime's personnel in the building, not just the playing personnel, but the scouts and
the front office in general.
Front office people in general. They're all there from the previous regime, and you can't just replace them all right away. And you can't even learn about the team that you're trying to draft for completely right away. And obviously, that puts a lot of pressure on you because 6 weeks after you come in, free agency begins, and you have to start making plans for that. Shane came in an unusually difficult situation in that Dave Gettleman left him not only with a team fairly bereft of talent, but one that was $40 million in the red relative to the cap. And so that first year, as I think people can forget a few years later, there wasn't much he could do in free agency. He had to release a lot of players that he might otherwise not have wanted to release. And his big splash, quote unquote, in free agency was Mark Lewinsky, who got $5 million, right? A year. Okay, he couldn't go after any big free agents, and so he had to come into that first draft not having done much to improve the team in free agency because financially he was very limited in what he could do. And then you add that to the fact that you're dealing mostly with the previous regime scouts and personnel evaluators in the building. And so it's maybe not a surprise that any GM's first draft doesn't necessarily turn out to be that great, but his in particular, given how his hands were tied that first year. And it showed. I think that's why he made several trade downs during that draft and accumulated 11 picks, because he just felt we need players. And the more shots I have in that draft, the better my chances are. But then the evaluation component maybe wasn't really there yet for him. So he went.
Well, one thing that Joe admitted, and I apologize for interrupting you. One thing that I remember that he admitted, you're talking about scouts and front office and all of that. Joe admitted that in that process, in that first year, he didn't know who to trust. He didn't know which evaluators were really good evaluators, which scouts were really good evaluators. He didn't know the scouting staff. Plus, as you said, you've got to deal with hiring a lot of coaches. You've got to deal with learning your own roster. But the point I wanted to make, and I'll let you finish in a second, the point I wanted to make is that Joe admitted that he didn't really know, what to believe in terms of what his scouts were telling him. And I think that showed particularly. He drafted Josh Azudu and Marcus McKethan, offensive linemen out of North Carolina, which was a bad offensive line. He drafted those two guys because he saw them both play. He saw them with his own eyes. So he tried to trust himself, and with everything else going on, he probably didn't have as much time to evaluate as he would have liked anyway.
That's right. Yeah, because you're trying to do lots of things simultaneously, and as you say, you're getting used to new people on in every aspect of the operation. But it showed, though, in the draft picks, because most of the players he drafted after the first round, and I feel sorry for him in this regard, but neither Kayvon Thibodeau nor Evan Neal has been what people hoped they would be. Although Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, gets more grief than he deserves. It's just that he was a number 5 pick, so you hoped with Kayvon Thibodeau that he'd turn out to be what Aiden Hutchinson did turn out to be, right? And he hasn't, but he's still a good, productive player, good enough that they picked up his 5th-year option. Okay, Evan Neal has been the bigger disappointment, obviously, and they did not pick up his option. But beyond that, once you get beyond those first 2 picks, I think that entire draft, everybody was saying, who's this guy? At least I was saying, who's this guy that they just drafted? And I had to hurry and look them up. The thing that we all laugh about at BBV that you always point out is that Chris Flum, who does all of these, he spends hours and hours and hours going over tape of college prospects. And after the first round, he had no tape on any of these guys, I think, until it got to Darian Beavers in the 6th round. And you say, how could a guy have 100 prospects or so in his list, and your team doesn't draft any?
Right. And Chris will never forgive Joe Schoen for that draft because, obviously, I think it was like 115 profiles. And obviously, we had profiles on Kayvon and on Evan Neal, but you might be right about Beavers, but we may not have had a profile on anybody else that Joe drafted that year. And Chris was just he was just floored.
Hey, why am I bothering to do all this work?
He's like, I remember him saying to me, I don't know what draft board Joe was looking at. He wasn't using the same one I was, but
Right. Yeah.
but
But
yeah.
and
So
that actually speaks to the point, though, that I think the larger point, though, about this draft and the piece you alluded to that I just wrote is that that's not the case this year. I think the one of the seventh round draft picks, Fedone, I think Chris doesn't have tape on him, but
he's
I think,
fired. He's fired.
but
He's done.
he's got tape on all the other ones, and a review on BBV that you can go look up, and so I think that's then the larger point I think about Joe Schoen is that maybe he's developed as a GCM, as a GM, and he has developed the staff at 1925 Giants Drive. And now he has in place, I believe, an evaluation procedure that looks on the surface as though it's giving him better information about the players themselves, maybe better information about where they can expect those players to be drafted so that you can strategize and decide when you should take them and when you can gamble on leaving them on the board for later, as they did with Bo. And that procedure seems to have worked in this draft. Again, a year from now, we may be sitting here saying, God, what an awful draft that was in 2025. And I thought it was going to be so good. But that's the whole point. We all think it's going to be good. And
Right.
that's all you can do is to ask your GM to get you players that the wisdom that's available at the time suggests that these are going to be NFL players. And he wasn't able to do that very much in 2022. And I thought last year he did a pretty good job of that for the first time, because those players all look like contributors, right? And obviously a couple of them look like they're going to be really good. And this year, it looks like the same thing. And so he may have had two great drafts in a row.
Absolutely. And one thing I will also point out about Joe Schoen, obviously the Giants were far better than anyone anticipated, far better than Joe anticipated, far better than Brian Daboll anticipated. They had an unexpected season. They made the playoffs. They won a playoff game. Joe has clearly admitted that, they came in with a long-term plan. And he clearly admitted that they deviated from the long-term building plan that they had in place because of the success in 2022. They never thought they would be signing Daniel Jones. I've directly asked Joe that question, and he never thought he would be there signing Daniel Jones to a long-term contract. He didn't think he would be doing things like trading away draft picks to sign it to get a guy like Darren Waller. He clearly admitted that they deviated from the quote unquote building plan that they had in place. And I think that what we've seen the last 2 years is that not only does he have the staff in place that he wants, and he knows his people, but he's gone back to the plan. And I think, we're beginning to see the results of that. Now, the Giants were 3-14 a year ago. They're not going to go win 12 games, and it's a brutal schedule. It could be a 6-win season where everybody's whining and groaning and complaining and when is Jackson Dart going to play? But I think you're beginning to see, that there is a plan in place, that there is a staff in place that can identify and bring talent to the Giants.
Yeah. And as proof of what you just said about 2022, very few people were surprised when Schoen did not pick up Daniel Jones's fifth-year option, which he had to do as soon as he came in 2022. And so that tells you more than anything that he might say in a presser. That tells you that he didn't think he was going to be signing Jones to a second contract, or at least he doubted that. that would happen, or else he would have picked up the fifth year option, because it's always better to pick up the fifth year option if you have a player that you think you're going to want to keep.
Right.
So,
I mean, he clearly, I asked him directly, when he signed Jones, and he said, absolutely. He said, if I had thought that we would be here, that Daniel Jones would have done what he did in 2022, if I had thought that would happen, I would have picked up the fifth year option. So a lot of things happened in 2022 that led the Giants to do some things that they hadn't initially thought they would do. But I think now the Giants are in a better place. They do seem to be moving forward. I really thought it was interesting. I had identified a lot of areas. The one thing that I criticized Joe for in the 2024 draft, although he got good players, aside from the quarterback question, I looked at it and I said he got good players, but he didn't touch the offensive or defensive lines. And I think the lack of depth there showed up in 2024. And he very clearly learned from that. This year, he drafted offensive and defensive line. He signed offensive and defensive line in free agency. He attacked that problem so that that's not a problem anymore. And I give him credit for that.
yeah, and not only did he attack it, but he got players who were drafted later than what their big board rankings said
He got value.
and got value. I mean, and that was true across the board. So it was not true for Abdul Carter, who was taken exactly where the community had agreed he would be taken at number 3. It was not true a little bit with Jackson Dart, where they, you know that when you trade up to get a quarterback, you're always reaching a little bit to do that. And obviously that's the verdict on this draft class, let's face it, is going to rest completely on whether Jackson Dart becomes the answer for them at quarterback. And regardless of how well the other picks do, if they fail on Jackson Dart, then it's going to be looked on as a failure for the entire class. And that's just the way it is in the NFL with quarterbacks. But beyond those first 2 picks, every single pick that he made was someone who was still on the board that the big board claimed could have easily been off the board already. And nowhere was that more true, I think, than on the offensive and defensive line. I mean, Bo, people saw him as actually possibly even a late second round pick, certainly a third round pick. And there he is, still sitting there in round 5.
I think on our big board, Chris and Nick had Bo and Scatabo as second round grades.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our big board is obviously not gospel. Please don't tell Chris I said that. but it's only one of many big boards and many opinions. But it is an indication that the Giants did, without any doubt, get value with the picks that they made. Darius Alexander,
that was the
tremendous pick. And Nick Filato, we posted a video today on the Big Blue View YouTube channel, breaking down Darius Alexander, and the player comp for Darius Alexander, for example, is Leonard Williams. And Leonard Williams next to Dexter Lawrence seemed to work out pretty well. If he turns into something like that, that's a good deal.
Yeah, and in fact, the article that you asked me to write before day 2 about players that the Giants might take on day 2, Darius Alexander was the very first one I listed. And as you say, he was regarded as a late second round at worst pick, and there he is, still sitting there at the top of round 3 for the Giants to take. And and to that point about Darius Alexander and playing next to Dexter Lawrence and recalling Leonard Williams, one of the nice things about this draft and free agency a little bit is that this Giants team has been without an identity for years. And now all of a sudden, you're looking at the front lines of that defense, and it's making Giants fans, think about the two previous Super Bowl teams when the Giants just seemed to collect defensive linemen and pass rushers, and they would draft them even when it looked like they didn't need to draft them, and they would just add more. And people say you can never have too many offensive linemen, but in today's NFL, I think you can never have too many defensive linemen also. And the Giants now look like they have almost
Well,
a numbers problem on the defensive line if these guys work out, that they
well,
have so many options for going out there and stuffing the run, and especially rushing the passer, that it could be a real identity for this team.
absolutely. I mean, one of the things, and the Eagles are, of course, the prime example of this on the defensive side. Of course, we know that their offensive line, even after the retirement of Jason Kelsey, their offensive line has been a stone wall. And we know that. But the other side of the ball is, the example Dave Gettleman used to talk about this. Jerry Reese talks about it. Every GM talks about building a deep defensive line rotation. And the Giants haven't had that for a while. And now they do. They have three quality edge defenders for two spots. And of course, Shane Bowen will have to, I don't want to say work some magic, but he will have to be creative, maybe use Abdul Carter off the ball, maybe do, on occasion, do some different things with the pass rush group. But you've got Dexter Lawrence, you've got Chauncey Golston, you've got Rakeem Nunez Rocha still on the roster, you've got Elijah Chapman, you've got Roy Robertson Harris, Jeremiah Ledbetter, and you've got Alexander. That's 7 or 8 guys that I just named, and I'm not sure all of them can even make the roster.
Yeah.
But and that's a good problem to have, because all of those veteran guys have established NFL credentials. You maybe not as great players, but they all belong on NFL rosters, and they all belong in rotations.
Yeah, and and the thing about last year is that, and this is why I think you always have to take it with a grain of salt when people complain that, oh, they're drafting at a position where they've already got enough people, and why do you want to add another one to that group? But the answer is that on the front line, on defense at least, and this isn't so true of the offensive line, but on defense at least, you can't play these guys 70-75 snaps a game. And I mean, they're just too big, and they're working too hard to try to get past huge offensive linemen that they wear down during the game. And you saw them
And
last year.
chase these backs and quarterbacks who are better athletes than they are.
Yeah, that's right. And you saw last year, they in some games they were absolutely exhausting. And this is really for the past 2 years. They were absolutely exhausting Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau, and last year Brian Burns, and so on, because they had to put them out there so much of the time that you're just going to wear down. And if you're not going to wear down in the fourth quarter of that particular game, you're going to wear down over the course of a season. And so you need fresh guys in there on defense up front. And now they've got that. And again, you reference the Eagles, and you look at what the Eagles do, right? And I mean, and I don't know how you could have watched the last Super Bowl and not signed on to the idea of having plenty of pass rushers, right? I mean, because that's what the Eagles do. They just throw at you wave after wave after wave of pass rushers, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that by the time the fourth quarter rolls around, and you're exhausted on the offensive side of the ball trying to hold those guys off.
And if you remember that, in the Super Bowls that the Giants have won, when the Giants have been really good, going all the way back to the Parcells era, when they've been really good, that front seven on defense has been their MO. It's been their identity. There have always been, there have always been question marks in the secondary on those defenses, guys you weren't 100% sure of. And right now, you can't be 100% sure of what you're going to get from Deonte Banks. You just don't know. But the MO for when the Giants have been really good, really quality, as a defensive unit has always been that dominant front seven, whether it was a 4-3, whether it was a 3-4, whatever. But that's, you're looking at a situation where, intentionally or not, and maybe it's intentionally, hopefully this was part of the plan, and I think it was, but they're building back toward that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just the other thing that struck me about this draft class, and Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll both talked about it. Look at the players that they drafted, not only the positions that they play, but Joe and Brian Daboll both talked a lot about toughness, mental and physical toughness. But if you look at it, you drafted a premier edge rusher at 3. You drafted a quarterback who Joe Schoen sort of jokingly said, we're going to have to teach him how to slide, because he likes to run people over.
Mm-hmm.
You drafted offensive and defensive line. You drafted a running back who said, I've been running people over since I was 6 years old. You've drafted a running back with some attitude. And I love that. I love that. A year ago, they drafted Malik Neighbors, and one of the things that you love about Malik Neighbors, sometimes you wish he would channel it a little bit better, but there's an edge to Malik Neighbors. There's a toughness to Malik Neighbors. There's an in-your-face confidence to Malik Neighbors. And, a downtrodden team that hasn't had a lot of success in recent years can certainly use that toughness and that attitude.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And yeah, I think this will be the first year that they have that attitude, and as you alluded to, they're starting to develop that attitude on the offensive side of the ball. I feel like now they've already got it, maybe on the defensive side of the ball with the additions they've made. The offensive side of the ball is a little different story, and maybe this is a good time to bring up a couple of the comments I see in the window from
I was going to get to those. Yes. So go ahead, Tony.
Yeah. So just the first comment that Kenny makes, offense was the issue last year. I don't agree that it was completely the issue, because I think the defense, and part of it maybe was just them getting worn down, but the defense could not stop the run most of last year. They actually kind of got a little better late in the season, but most of last year they could not stop the run. They had a pretty good pass rush, but couldn't stop the run. So hopefully that's going to be better this year. I think the offense question is very interesting, and I think the question for all of us is, why was the Giants' offense so bad last year? And so I think the number one thing is that the quarterback play was bad. Okay, and I think everyone would agree that the quarterback play was bad, and I would argue that there were probably at least 4 games that the Giants lost, if not more, that you can directly attribute to poor quarterback play. I would say that the first Dallas game, the Cincinnati game, the Carolina game, just off the top of my head, the New Orleans game, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple of others in there, but there were a bunch of games last year that were there for the taking in the fourth quarter, and the Giants just could not do the job on offense to close the deal. The couple of times they did get decent quarterback play and managed to score a few touchdowns, like in Seattle and in Cleveland to some extent, they wound up winning those games when they got good quarterback play from Drew Luck late in the game in Indianapolis, or against Indianapolis. They won that game, and so each of the 3 games they won coincided with a productive offensive performance, and so uh, and then to get to Kenny's last point about the offensive line, or actually the last 2 points about the offensive line and it being a big issue, and that we had a good offensive line that protected Eli Manning. I'll certainly sign on to that for the 2007 team that won the Super Bowl, but by 2011, that team no longer had a very good offensive line. That was a kind of leaky offensive line, yet that team still scored a lot of points because Eli had one of his greatest seasons, maybe his greatest season ever, but certainly one of his greatest seasons ever. I don't think the offensive line was that bad last year while Andrew Thomas was still healthy. I think they were okay. They were certainly not a good offensive line, but I think they were okay. They weren't the disaster that the 2023 offensive line was. But as soon as Andrew Thomas got hurt, then they really did not have a reliable backup to put in his place. And so they had to mix and match until he came back late in the season. You have to hope that's what they have now this year, that they have a little bit of depth on the offensive line, both with Bo, who they're starting out as a tackle to see how he looks there, but also then the free agents that they signed, like Hudson. I still wouldn't mind seeing them bring back Tyree Phillips again. I don't think he's signed with anyone yet, but I always liked having Tyree Phillips there as a depth piece. So we'll see what happens with that. But I don't think the offensive line is as terrible as people think if it's healthy. And now at least they have one more piece. I'd sure like them to come back next year and add yet one more piece to the offensive line, especially in the interior, maybe two in the interior. So I think that the offensive line is still a work in progress, but it's not the disaster it was. The big question is going to be, do they get good quarterback play this year and beyond? And that depends on what you think of Russell Wilson. I happen to think Russell Wilson is still an effective quarterback in the NFL. I don't know that Pittsburgh offense under Arthur Smith was the best match for Russell Wilson's talents and offensive philosophy. So we'll see whether a Brian Dable, Mike Kafka offense is more to Russell Wilson's liking. But Russell Wilson can still throw the ball, and he can still throw the ball deep. And you do have Malik Neighbors there, who I just think is an awesome talent that maybe this year they'll be able to exploit more fully than they were able to last year. And he still got 1,200 yards last year, even though he had poor quarterback play most of the time.
Right. I'm going to just second a couple of things that you said. The offensive line last year, I think Joe Schoen did a good job in free agency in adding Greg Van Roten, in adding Jermaine Illuminor, who had an excellent year at right tackle before he had to move over to the left side, adding John Runyon, who's not a great player, but he's a good, he's an NFL starting guard. He's a capable player. They were fine. They were middle of the pack. If you look at the grades and you look at all of that, they were middle of the pack. They were good enough until Andrew Thomas got hurt. Then John Runyon got hurt, and John Michael Schmitz missed some time. And the lack of depth, the fact that they hadn't added anybody in the draft, the lack of depth is really what hurt them. They made some decisions to go with Josh Azudu and guys like that, and it just didn't work. To Joe's credit, he's added two potentials. He's added potential swing tackles, and all of that. And the other point is, I think Kenny Lanzo mentioned that Russell Wilson's not what he was 6 or 7 years ago, and I think we'll all agree with that. But go look at the numbers, Kenny. Go look at the numbers. Russell Wilson is still a better NFL quarterback than Daniel Jones. He's still a better NFL quarterback than Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito. He is still an upgrade, even though he may not be what he was in his prime. He's still a quality player. And I know things haven't worked out, in his last couple of stops. And I know maybe some of that has been personality based and all of that. But I still believe he's an upgrade, and they probably win. As you said, they probably win 4 more games last year if Russell Wilson's the quarterback. Not that that makes them a great team, but he's an upgrade over what they had, and that's fine. And the long-term issue isn't about Russell Wilson anyway. It's about Jackson Dart. So it's about what Jackson Dart becomes, because what Jackson Dart becomes is a lot more important to the Giants than what Russell Wilson is. Anyway, Tony, I see you, kind of trying to navigate some of the some of the comments here. Is there anything else in the comments that you that you wanted to address or wanted to mention?
Yeah, and so I think obviously, as we talked a little bit about earlier, this class will sink or swim on whether Jackson Dart becomes a really good NFL quarterback or not. And I think there's just no getting around that. They could have all the other draft picks hit, but if Jackson Dart turns out to be another Daniel Jones, let's say, or worse, a Zach Wilson or a Trey Lance or something like that, then this class is going to be viewed as a failure, and it's probably going to be the end of the line for Schoen and Dable, because another season anything like 3-14 just is not going to cut it. And there are definitely questions about Dart. And as one of the comments indicated, right, he ran a very simplified offense under Lane Kiffin. A lot of half field, first read, see it, throw it, type of plays. He throws a nice deep ball, but his deep ball kind of loses steam a little bit when he really tries to go very long, and sometimes he just does not make good decisions. And Ole Miss had a chance, last year, I think to get. I don't remember what they finally finished with as a record, but I think they had a chance to get into the playoffs. But he did not play well down the stretch. In particular, I think they had a key game against against Florida, where he threw an end zone pick in a crucial point in the game that was a pass he just should not have thrown, or shouldn't have thrown as late as he threw it. Might have been able to complete it if he let go of the ball quicker. So he's definitely got question marks about him, but at the same time, he obviously has talent, and there are things he does well. He's going to have to, and there's a reason why the Giants signed not only one but 2 veteran quarterbacks before they drafted one, because once you get past Cam Ward, I don't think there is a single quarterback in this draft who will be ready to step onto an NFL field and start on day one. I mean, they all are quarterbacks with flaws, and that's just the way this class is. And so, thank God, Jackson Dart has a year to sit and learn, because he is going to need to learn. And it's not just that he's a rookie; it's that he's a rookie who comes from an offense that didn't necessarily prepare you to step onto an NFL field and beat NFL defenses. And we're going to have to see how well can he learn that stuff. How well can he play when he's lining up behind center instead of in the shotgun? How productive can he be when you're not running play action 50-60% of the time the way Ole Miss ran it? I mean, that's about twice as much as NFL teams tend to run play action. Can he cut down on the mistakes that he made in college? Can he get to his second and third reads more often than he was asked to do or was able to do in college? There are all those questions, yet underlying all of that, there's an undeniable talent that you can see there watching him throw the ball. And so right now, I have no idea whether he's going to be great or not. I could see it go either way. Ordinarily, you wouldn't trade up into the first round to do that, but in today's NFL, it's just the price of doing business that if you see somebody who looks like they could be a good NFL quarterback, I understand you have to go get them. You can't just sit there and watch as picks go by and guys go off the board. So I understand what the Giants did with that trade up. I don't even disagree with it. I'm just holding my breath with it, hoping that he works out the way that they think he can work out, and having some level of confidence in Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka to be able to bring that out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as it worked out, Jackson Dart, in the opinions of the NFL and in the opinions of the Giants, was clearly, QB2 in the class. We know from the work that we've done at Big Blue View, we've tracked the quarterbacks back to 2010, and odds for every team are not perfect. Odds are, if you judge by, we use the term solid starter and above, as a Pro Bowl guy or as a Hall of Fame guy, then solid starter at least, in terms of categorizing these guys. And I think the numbers show that less than 40% of these guys drafted in the first round turn out to be at least quality starters. But when you think there's one there, as you said, Tony, and Brian Daboll said, this kid has all of the traits that they wanted, all of the traits, from the arm, the mobility, enough size, the intelligence, the leadership, the toughness. He has all of those things that they covet, that they wanted. Whether they'll all translate into him being the player that they hope they need, isn't, that's not a guarantee. We don't know. And the one thing I will say is, they didn't draft Jackson Dart because Joe Judge likes him. Joe Judge has nothing to do with it. They drafted Jackson Dart because they studied the kid for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, and as a staff, came to the conclusion, with all of the information that they had from everywhere that they gather information, that he was the guy, that they wanted to take a swing with. Maybe in a different year, in a different circumstance, they wouldn't have taken a quarterback, but it was, for me, a situation where they had to take one. He's the guy they chose to go with, and you root for the kid to succeed. That's, and as we've said, I mean, the success or failure of the franchise and of this draft class eventually will come down to, can Jackson Dart be the guy that they're banking on?
Exactly. And for all of the people who worry about Jackson Dart, I think people have this image now of NFL quarterbacks just stepping onto the field and being great right away, and I think that's influenced by Tom Brady, coming out of nowhere and then doing what he did. But frankly, Tom Brady wasn't that great his first few years. He was much better than you'd ever expect a sixth round draft pick to be. But he wasn't the main reason the Patriots won those first couple of Super Bowls. It was the rest of the team and Belichick. And it wasn't until 2007 when the Patriots put in that spread offense and had Randy Moss and defenses just didn't know what to do about it, that Brady really began to blossom into the greatest ever, if you think he is, quarterback that we think of him today. It took time even for him, and it took them to develop an offense that was suited to what he could do and the personnel they had before that offense really became that unstoppable thing that was finally stopped by the Giants defense in the Super Bowl. But I'd also invite Giants fans to remind themselves of Eli Manning's career arc in the pros. He was obviously a much ballyhooed quarterback prospect whom the Giants didn't trade up to draft, but traded up after the draft to get him after they had already taken Phillip Rivers. And people remember Eli for the 2 Super Bowls, but the fact is Eli went through almost 4 complete seasons looking like a bust. before
It's
he became the great quarterback that Giants fans remember.
it's interesting that you bring that up, Tony, because it made me think Big Blue View launched in 2007.
Hmm.
And the very first thing that we did at Big Blue View, the very first sort of big thing that we did was debate at the beginning of 2007 whether or not Eli Manning was the right quarterback for the Giants to go forward with, because he hadn't proven it yet. And the reality of it is, I remember a while back going back and looking at some of that writing and some of what we did in 2007. Even through the middle and the latter stages of 2007, we were still debating whether Eli Manning was the right guy and whether Eli is the guy that the Giants could win with. He didn't become Eli Manning that we remember now. He became that guy in the 2007 playoffs. Entering the 2007 playoffs, Giants fans and media around the Giants in the NFL were still questioning if he was good enough to lead a playoff team and win playoff games. So he didn't become what we think of as Eli Manning until that 2007 playoff run. So these guys, it's still a development curve. What Jaden Daniels did in 2024 is still not the norm. CJ Stroud did it in 2023, but he took a step back in 2024. So it's still not the norm because we've seen it a couple times recently. You think, "Oh, I want that guy." But it takes time. And the Giants fortunately have put Jackson Dart in a situation where he doesn't have to carry this franchise from the very beginning. He can sit, he can learn. Maybe there comes a point in time, 2/3 of the way through the season, where, you know, where Brian Daboll makes his Tom Coughlin decision and benches the future Hall of Fame veteran for the kid that's the future of the franchise. Maybe that time comes. We'll see. But but to expect these guys to hit the ground running is just still not the norm. Bo Nix had a great year in 2024, in addition to Jaden Daniels, but that's still, that's 2 out of 6 guys. And Drake May showed promise, but I don't think Drake May played to the level of Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. But but it's just not the norm. That's the last thing I want to say. It's still, but the draft, future of the franchise at this point comes down to Jackson Dart. We'll see how it goes. We'll see where it leads. I just encourage Giants fans. You may or may not have agreed with the Dart decision. You may or may not agree with every decision, but root for the team. Don't, root for the team. Look at it. It is what it is. The players that they have are the players that they have, and the ones that you should be rooting for. So,
yeah, and I will say, in response to the, I'm with you. I worry about whether Jackson Dart is going to be the guy, but I think it's so unpredictable. I mean, so I will admit that I was not a big fan of CJ Stroud coming out of the draft. I thought that he was a good quarterback, but I didn't think he was. I don't know, based on what I saw of him, and I thought I saw enough of him at Ohio State. I really thought he was more of a product of that offense and the receivers that they had, rather than being so great himself. And then he comes into Texas, and starts for Houston, and he looks good almost right off the bat. I mean, that's the amazing thing about CJ Stroud, is that he had almost no adjustment to the NFL at all. He just came in week 1, week 2, and he was off and running.
mm-hmm.
So I think it's fairly unusual that quarterbacks succeed that quickly. But I also think that he was a better prospect than Jackson Dart is viewed as being coming into the NFL. There were fewer question marks about him than there are about Jackson Dart, and so. I'm with the fans. I'll be holding my breath until I see Jackson Dart on the field and start to get some sense that he can actually be the guy. And there's a chance that he won't be the guy. Yet, what could they do in the
Right.
position that they were in? They obviously had to draft a quarterback this year, and it's just a question of which one you want to roll the dice on. And Dart was as good a roll of the dice, I think, as you could make given the position in which they were in. Cam Ward is the only guy in this draft that you would argue has a high probability of becoming a good NFL quarterback.
And even that, Tony, if I was the Tennessee Titans, you hold your breath, because there's no guarantee. As I said, it's first round quarterbacks, less than a 40% success rate over the last 15 years or so in the NFL. So we'll see how it goes. On paper, as we said, a really good weekend for Giants fans. The last two drafts really taken together, despite the 3-14 season, should, in my mind, give Giants fans some hope that things are finally starting to turn, that there's an opportunity. It's a long way to catch up to the Eagles, to catch up to the Kansas City Chiefs, to catch up to the Baltimore Ravens. But in my mind, you should feel better about this team now than you did, definitely than you did at the end of the 2024 season.
Yeah, I think that they're now starting to build out a solid roster. And I don't think you could say that. You certainly couldn't say that 2 years ago. Maybe you couldn't even say that last year, although they added some talent last year. But they're beginning to fill all the holes, right? And I'm saying they have no holes left, but now I think they've got fewer holes than they have potential areas of strength. And so I could be wrong, but I didn't see last year's team coming out 3-14, but I don't think 3-14 is happening again with this team.
We hope not. And it's funny because I'm in the middle of doing an updated depth chart. And that's the thing that's catching my attention as we go through, as we look at what Joe Schoen did in free agency and we look at what he did in this draft. What's catching my attention is I haven't yet come across a position as I go through this where I look at it and I say, my God, who's going to play? There look to be NFL caliber players, and there looks to be some depth at every position. Maybe not enough game-changing talent yet, but to me the roster's getting there, and and we'll see where it goes. We'll see if 2025 is better, and hopefully it will be. Tony, I think we have prattled on for about an hour, and I think I think that's long enough. How about you?
I think so.
All right, I think that's a good place for us to end. Giants fans, thank you for watching. Thank you for participating. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.